Today I'm going to be talking about a very interesting new movie that came out on Hulu this past week called Not Okay. I had watched the trailer and it is a dark comedy, but it was really not what I expected. Hello and welcome back to the Miscellaneous channel where we do miscellaneous things. I'm Zeleny. I typically cover TV, pop culture, internet trends, and other miscellaneous things on this channel, so subscribe if that's your vibe. So let's get into it. Is Not Okay worth watching? My short answer is I don't think so for most people. I don't know if most people would enjoy it. I do need to make clear that if you don't like stories that star a villain or an unlikable protagonist, you will not like this movie. The protagonist literally has like little to no redeeming qualities. It even has a disclaimer at the beginning that says this movie has an unlikable female protagonist. So if you don't like movies and stories about a bad person, and it's not even like an anti-hero type that like has a heart of gold despite being grumpy, kind of like Shrek, or is doing something illegal for a really intense and sad motivation like Walter White in Breaking Bad. The trailer kind of portrays this movie as pretty lighthearted, but I find it really hard to recommend because it feels lighthearted in certain ways. It's comedic, it's satire, but then it's also really dramatic in the subject matter it includes. It's such a weird juxtaposition of tones. I did find it entertaining. The pacing was good. It was constantly moving. It is interesting and makes you think. It made me think a lot. I don't know if it was in a great way or the way the movie wanted me to, but I think a big point of the movie is just to make you think and provoke. Not Okay has a 74% on Rotten Tomatoes by critic scores and a 65% by audience scores, and I definitely agree more with the audience score number. It's above 50% in quality, but it has a lot of fatal flaws that made me not love it in the end. Next, I want to touch on about Not Okay, how it came to be. Not Okay dropped on Hulu on July 31st of 2022. It was written and directed by Quinn Shephard. Apparently she was the girl in Unaccompanied Minors, that random Christmas movie about a bunch of kids stuck in an airport. She was the quirky one, not the rich one. And tell me why this rich girl was like my ultimate style icon as a 15-year-old with her little sweater and boots and jeans combination. I watched a few interviews with Quinn Shephard. She said that the idea for the Not Okay script came from her scrolling her social media feeds and seeing the juxtaposition of really tragic sad news like mass shootings and more vapid influencer type stuff and consumerism all next to each other getting similar coverage. Quinn Shephard did have a deal already set in place with Hulu to make a movie. Not Okay is Quinn Shephard's second film. She debuted a movie called Blame, and that's how she caught the attention of Hulu, and they gave her a deal to produce one of her movies. She's pretty young. She's just about my age, a little younger than me, so that would make her 26 or 27. Not Okay stars Zoe Dutch as the main character. I don't know if I'm saying her name right. She typically plays kind of relatable characters. I first saw her in Everybody Wants Some, which was kind of a spiritual sequel to Dazed and Confused. I also saw her later in a Netflix rom-com called Set It Up, which is actually a really cute one. It's like about two assistants that try to set up their bosses and fall in love in the process. Who would have thought? Zoe Dutch was also in that movie where James Franco plays like a tech billionaire CEO, and it's like hilarious because she's like a normal girl and he's like a tech CEO, and her family is like, ew, he's crazy and obnoxious. Dylan O'Brien is also in Not Okay. He plays a pretty funny character. He plays kind of like a TikTok e-boy type, and his character was one of the more well-executed satires for me, and I'll get to that. Not Okay also features Mia Isaac. She carried this movie on her little shoulders. She's pretty young. She plays like a 17-year-old who is a survivor of a school shooting in this movie. Trigger warning, this movie talks about shootings and gun violence and terrorist attacks. You do get a little bit of that in the trailer, but it's not quite as clear how big of a deal that whole thing is gonna be. Mia Isaac delivered such a great performance. Like, everyone on this movie was doing a Hulu movie, and Mia Isaac was on HBO. Like, hopefully she has a good career ahead of her. Quinn Shephard's fiance plays a character named Harper in this. Does that make her a nepotism baby? Comment below. Oh, also the mom of the main character is that very comforting, nice teacher from Matilda. Does anyone else remember how comforting she was? She looks great. Like, Matilda was forever ago and she looked almost the same. Good for her. Okay, so let's talk about the plot. Because I want to cover such heavy themes about this movie, I'm gonna do the plot recap first and then discuss the big themes afterwards. Not Okay is divided into 9 parts. We have title cards for all the parts. I wonder if this was inspired by like TikTok, like for part 2, but I thought it was kind of random the movie was divided so much. Also, this is kind of petty, but the parts were labeled in Roman numerals instead of just numbers. Once I got past part 3, I was like math lady meme every time there was a part. I know how to read Roman numerals, but they should look out for the dummies and be nice and just put a fucking number. It's not artsy to just put Roman numerals for no reason. Not Okay starts with the classic scene from the ending. The protagonist ended up in this crazy situation. She got canceled online. We see a cameo from Smokey Glow, which is a YouTuber I watch. Hey girl! We do get some voiceover narration where she talks about how she just wants to be known for something, anything, but ends up getting canceled. At the end of the voiceover narration, she looks at the camera, breaking the fourth wall, and says, "Be careful what you fucking wish for." And that's where we start into part 1. Nobody understands me, and it's where we're introduced to our main character named Danny Sanders. Danny is a photo editor at a publication outlet called Depravity. I think it's supposed to emulate a sort of BuzzFeed, that kind of outlet. Danny lives in Brooklyn and comes from a privileged background, so she's kind of always had an easy life. We see that she wants to be a writer. She is trying to pitch ideas to her boss, and her boss is just like, "You're a photo editor, go do that." Danny is also unpopular at work, that is made clear, and she has a guinea pig named Guinea Weasley. I need to give a PSA here. Millennial filmmakers, listen to me. Gen Z does not like Harry Potter. Stop making your Gen Z characters like Harry Potter and make Harry Potter references. You can make your millennial characters like Harry Potter, go for it, that would be perfect, but Gen Z, you might want to do some more research. End of PSA. So I'm obviously hyperbolizing a bit here, but I saw it happen on the High School Musical, the musical, the series a lot too. I'm not saying no Gen Z could like Harry Potter. There are obviously a lot of Gen Zs that like Harry Potter, or Zillennials that like Harry Potter, but as far as popular culture goes, it's kind of out of favor with the general youth culture. In Not Okay, the main character is clearly following a lot of Gen Z trends. Just the way she looks makes that blatantly clear, so I feel like she would be up to date or trying to distance herself from Harry Potter. So part 2 is The Lie. Danny has a crush at her job named Colin, played by Dylan O'Brien. She runs into him near this matcha shop and tells him that she's going on a trip to Paris for a writer's retreat. Even though she's not a writer, she's not going to Paris, and she's just trying to impress him. Colin is an influencer for this Depravity company she works at, so he has a lot of followers, a lot of fans, and she's trying to impress him by going to Paris. I don't know why that's that impressive, but okay. She goes back home and is like, "I want to go to Paris." Basically, her guinea pig like gets on her computer and somehow photoshops her onto a Paris background. This gerbil is coming for my job because if y'all don't know, I'm a graphic designer as my day job. Honestly, nowadays with Photoshop, it's pretty easy to remove the background and stuff. There's like a button for it, but I don't think a hamster could figure it out. Like, come on, I'm not that useless. But because the guinea pig photoshopped the idea, she's like, "Great idea, gerbil, I will do that," and Photoshop photos of myself in Paris, and Colin will think I'm cool for going to Paris. So she makes up this lie and goes along with it, makes a bunch of pictures, a bunch of posts, and then a few days later she wakes up to news that there were a bunch of terrorist attacks in Paris. Next we have part 3, which is oh fuck. Her family and friends are all super concerned about her and trying to reach her, and she hadn't been answering because she was asleep, and so now she has to tell everyone she's okay, that she's safe. She even gets a message from her crush Colin. It's like the first time she's gotten his attention. Oh god, my foot fell asleep. Oh my god, I can't feel my foot. Danny then keeps up the charade by going to the airport when there's a flight deboarding from Paris and joins the crowd as if she is coming back. The parents are all like catering to her every need, and she's kind of starting to realize the attention she's getting. Next we have part 4, which is called What I Saw That Day, and this is where she starts leaning in a lot to the lie. She returns to work where all her coworkers are obsessed with her. Her boss is like being really nice and giving her opportunities, giving her an office. She's even letting her write for the first time, which at the beginning the boss was being very mean, saying she shouldn't write anything, and Danny is eating it all up because now she has to write an article about her experience at this Paris attack that she was not at actually. She ends up going to a support group for survivors of gun violence and attacks of this sort. It was this scene where I started to feel a little uncomfortable with the morality of this movie, and I'll talk in depth about that in a bit. But she joins this support group, and it is there where she meets a young girl named Rowan, Rowan is a survivor of a mass shooting and is an influencer activist against gun violence, similar to some of the survivors of the Parkland shooting that then became activists like Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg, I believe. It kind of seems like the Rowan character was based on those types of people. Meeting Rowan leads us into part 5, which is just called Rowan. Danny is actively trying to befriend Rowan because of Rowan's following. So Danny is fully clout chasing to this 17-year-old who is just trying to make a difference in the world. And the main thing Danny wants from Rowan is enough information for her to write her article. And Rowan gives her this speech, or not speech, but this conversation about how it's okay to not be okay. And she just says a lot of great things about being not okay and how like maybe everyone's not okay, and Danny takes Rowan's words like word for word, verbatim, puts them in her article, and then the article goes viral. Rowan does help out by reposting her article, and that's what gives it the push to become viral. There is a hashtag that goes along with it, hashtag I am not okay, and that really catches on where celebrities are doing it, and that leads us into part 6 called I Am Not Okay. Danny is on cloud 9, happy that she is getting all the attention she wanted. Rowan kind of tries to warn her that the internet can turn on you, this kind of a foreshadowing moment, because Rowan gets a lot of hate, very experienced with the internet. Danny, however, is very dismissive of it and doesn't think anyone's gonna turn on her. The delusion. Rowan tells her that she actually gets stage fright before her spoken word performances, because Rowan's not just like an activist, her speeches are like spoken word pieces. It's very impactful, very emotional. Rowan also tells Danny about her big sister, who was one of the victims of the shooting she was in. But in this part is also where Danny is just having a lot of success at work. Everyone loves her except for one coworker, Harper, who is a little bit onto her. Danny finally gets Colin's attention here too, and he invites her to an influencer party. She goes to that, she's loving it, and they actually end up having sex in the bathroom, and it's really quick, really aggressive, and clearly Danny's not into it from the look on her face. And after Danny has sex with Colin, she's kind of over him at that point because he ditches her after that, and she just moves on and isn't interested in him anymore. She kind of ignores him the rest of the movie. So after getting ditched by Colin, she realizes that there's this kickball game happening with the support group that she's been attending, and she decides to go join the kickball game with Rowan. She has this moment of kind of enjoying the community of it all. That's kind of one of her only happy moments, or like wholesome moments, I guess, for this character. Next we go into part 7 called I Am a Good Person Now, which is after this like community moment, it feels like Danny wants to be a little better, but it doesn't mean like coming clean just yet. We see Danny going on like talk shows, doing press, loving it. She does like a fit check. While Danny is distracted doing all this press, Harper is sneaking onto her computer. Danny also attends this rally with Rowan. In the car on the way to the rally, she plays Avril Lavigne because the big sister used to play that for Rowan. And it's sad because Danny is doing it purely out of like cloud chasing, and she's really just manipulating her to kind of legitimize her own story and fame. So at this rally, it actually gets interrupted by some anti-gun control people that throw fireworks on them, obviously triggering Rowan. It was interesting seeing kind of the other villains of this movie because the main villain is truly Danny. She kind of represents this white woman, privileged or ignorant type of person. It was interesting to see another villain that wasn't Danny in this and showing the presence of like kind of the alt-right or the anti-gun control type of crowd. They throw fireworks and say snowflakes, haha, that's one of their favorite words. Also after this, Rowan's getting attacked by the alt-right on social media, saying she's like a fraud, which is ironic because Danny is the fraud and not Rowan, obviously. It's also at this point that Danny's hallucination gets revealed. Throughout the whole movie, Danny had been seeing this person in a jacket following her around everywhere. The image came from a news report she saw of the suspected bomber of Paris. But finally she has a dream where she catches up to the hooded figure and turns around, and of course it's her. After this is where Harper comes and confronts Danny that she found her Photoshop files, knows what she lied about, and is gonna expose her unless she wants to do it first. Gives her an ultimatum. I guess that's blackmail. I don't know. And Rowan decides to come clean herself on her socials and writes that she faked it and does kind of like a notes app apology thing. It actually wasn't a notes app apology, and I feel like it should have been for accuracy reasons. This is where she starts getting canceled. Obviously, the internet completely turns on her. Rowan confronts her for lying to her this whole time. And that leads us into part 8 called I Don't Get a Redemption Arc. So this is where she's canceled. We're kind of back to the beginning scenes we saw. She gets doxxed. She has a confrontation with someone in real life. It's kind of scary. So she moves back in with her parents at their rich place. But the parents are also very disappointed and angry that she did this and like just worried about her future and aren't sympathetic to her the way they were earlier in the movie when they thought she survived the attacks. After this, she goes to a canceled support group which has a cameo from the filmmaker. She's the one that says, why should we like this woman or whatever. And the leader of the cancellation support group was apparently a real life canceled person on YouTube named Carolyn Calloway. It's so weird to me, like the bubbles that we live in on the internet, because I've never heard of this Carolyn Calloway person. I could tell you a play-by-play of the 3 Dramageddon saga of how the beauty gurus all got canceled on YouTube, but I don't know anything about Carolyn Calloway. Like, I'm like, the internet works in mysterious ways. But apparently this girl like didn't pay rent for a long time, and she like sold workshops that didn't end up happening. She was just kind of scammy. There was also a lady that just looked like a Karen. I don't know if this is a specific Karen, but like it was funny to see the haircut represented. And then the final part, part 9, called the finale. Danny goes to see Rowan's spoken word performance, and the spoken word performance ends up being about Danny, and it's very powerful, and Danny just listens and then walks out. And that's the end of the movie. There is one line in the spoken word piece where Rowan says, why do people like you get movies on Netflix and Hulu? And I'm like, ask this filmmaker. It's ironic that Rowan is criticizing that people like Danny get a movie on Hulu, in a movie on Hulu about Danny. Like, it just feels a little hypocritical. Is it on purpose? Is it not? Is it camp? Is it not? The lines have blurred. I can't tell if it's bad on purpose, bad on accident, or what. So let me get into first the tone of the movie. That was one of my biggest issues with it. I was getting emotional whiplash from the comedy bits and then the heaviness of the subject matter of gun violence. Like, that is such a heavy topic. It's hard to make funny. It's a taboo thing to depict it in this manner, and I did feel uncomfortable with it. I do think art can make you uncomfortable, and that is the point sometimes, and that was probably the point here, but it definitely made me not like the movie that much and made me be like, is this appropriate? Like, is this okay? Apparently when Quinn Shephard was first writing the script, she asked like her friends and family, like, is this idea horrible or good? And her friends and family said it was good, and I was just like, maybe someone should have said it's kind of horrible. It's a little too much. It is labeled as a dark comedy, so it makes sense that it deals with serious topics, but I just feel like it wasn't dealt with the respect it deserved, and the comedy and the dark just kind of clashed for me. With the trailer and how the movie started out, Danny felt like a typical like comedy or rom-com protagonist. She works at a magazine, she wants to be a writer, she's unpopular, she has a crush that doesn't notice her. Like, it all felt really normal until this terrorist attacks moment where things got serious but the tone stayed comedic. I feel like the only element of the movie that made me feel like the suspense or like the darkness were the suspenseful like a cappella transitions in like French that made certain scenes suspenseful. However, for me, when I hear a cappella transitions, I get war flashbacks to Glee. The question I kept asking myself about this was, is this appropriate? I do think the spoken word pieces were very well written and well performed, and those were the parts where it felt like it was addressing the subject matter in a respectful way, an appropriate way, like an angry way that made sense for like the lack of change in America on this issue. And the movie was realistic to the potential consequences of a character like Danny, who lied about something like this in the public eye, how she got canceled so viciously. At least she got her punishment, which for the audience should be kind of satisfying. But I'm just like, did they talk to survivors for this movie? What kind of research did they do? It did feel like it made light of survivors in certain ways, especially there was this one guy, which this was a very small part of the movie, but one guy in the support group was at the Ariana Grande concert where there was a shooting. I believe this was in Manchester. And when they introduced this character, they were like, he was at the Ariana Grande concert. And it felt like the movie like paused for laughs. And I was just like, that's not funny. I think it's because he's like a middle-aged guy. And that was the joke, that he had gone to an Ariana Grande concert. But let me just say this, as a big dance pop fan myself, y'all don't know how many times I've bonded with men about our taste in music being upbeat dance pop, both gay men and straight men. This guy said he was at the Ariana Grande concert and it was kind of supposed to be a joke, and I was just like reacting to that because I was like, that's so sad. Like, that was a really tragic incident, and it doesn't matter what somebody looks like, they can be a fan of pop music. So mini rant there, but it just felt weird to make light of survivors of like a real life incident like that. I don't think it was malicious or anything. I think it was just trying to make any joke they could here. And in general, just how Danny shows no empathy, only pursues the survivors for clout. I know that was the point. Like, the point was that Danny was bad and behaving inappropriately, but it's hard to wrap my mind around lacking that much empathy, to the point where it was confusing if like Danny was like sociopathic or insane in some way. Like, I say that completely seriously, like if she did have some sort of disorder. I just personally don't think the subject matter was handled appropriately, despite me believing that taboo subjects can be fictionalized. It's a tricky tightrope to walk, and it's very easy to mess it up, and I feel like this movie messed it up a bit. Not completely disastrous. It definitely felt weird and uncomfy for me. A contrasting example to this is a movie called The Fallout, which I did a review on my channel if you want to check it out. It has kind of a similar backstory to Not Okay. The Fallout, however, is a drama. It's very serious, but it is about survivors of a school shooting and following the aftermath of the incident. The protagonist is kind of like not reacting the way she's supposed to be in this case, but it's still handled very delicately. It has humorous moments. It's interesting because The Fallout also has a youthful actress turned director. What's her name? Megan Park, I think. She just approached the nuances so well. And of course it's a drama. It's a totally different beast, but it was interesting how Not Okay and The Fallout had similar content, similar creators, but such different outcomes. So I want to talk more in depth about our main character, Danny Sanders. The movie starts with a disclaimer that says this movie will contain flashing lights, themes of trauma, and an unlikable female protagonist. Right away, that was the first thing I saw, and I was like, whoa, this is interesting. Like, what is going on? To be honest, the disclaimer did help me to, right off the bat, understand that I'm not supposed to like this main character. It's kind of a joke. It's kind of weird. I read an interview with Quinn Shephard, and the disclaimer came about because in their test screenings of the movie, a certain demographic, she didn't name who, but I think it's implied that men or straight white men, I don't know. This demographic was very upset by the main character and that she was unlikable. That was such a common complaint that they put in this disclaimer at the beginning. It's kind of sad that this disclaimer is needed. I would have been satisfied with the disclaimer being just an unlikable protagonist. It was just kind of confusing because I was like, is this a real disclaimer? Because there's like a joke in it. Is there even flashing lights in here? So I do think there is sexism towards unlikable female protagonists and flawed women in media. However, I feel like Danny is beyond unlikable and more like unbelievable as a character. I don't mind an unlikable protagonist. I don't mind a villain protagonist. Some people really hate it, but I like that. And it's fun and scary and can be very suspenseful. But I think the point of Danny as a character is to be a blueprint, especially for white women and young white women. She's a blueprint of how not to be. Like, if you see any of yourself in her throughout the movie, maybe it's time to re-examine. An example of this is how Danny sometimes has these microaggression moments that are pretty ignorant. Like, she tells the queer people at her job that she wishes she was gay just so she could get invited to their bowling night and have a parade. Later on, she tells Rowan that her spoken word sounds like Hamilton. Maybe someone watching this could see that, and if they've ever said a comment like that, recognize that that's a bad thing. But I think that's too much work for especially someone like this that probably doesn't see themselves in Danny. Like, I think to show a interesting villainous white woman character, I feel like she has to have some likable qualities because it's hard to explain, but for example, in I Care a Lot, the main character has this facade that she seems like she cares, but behind closed doors, she's actually this evil villain trying to take elderly people's riches, and it's really cruel and scary, but it's scarier because she turns on this facade where she seems really nice and approachable. I think a more nuanced approach to Danny would have been really beneficial in this movie. I think Danny she had every single flaw that a person could have, to the point where it's like too many flaws. She doesn't feel personified. She doesn't feel like a real human being to me. She feels like a weird representation of like an entire generation, to the point where she loses like the grounded humanity. She doesn't have like these vulnerable moments or redeemable qualities, nothing. They could have at least shown her have plan B pain the next day after she took it, and someone could have sympathized with that pain. And it's also confusing because she does have a conscience. She has this weird figure following her around and hallucinating. There was never any action taken on that. So the hallucination really felt kind of pointless. And I was so confused by Danny's motivations for so many things. Why did she want to be a writer? We never got a reason for that. She's just obsessed. Since when is the creative and graphic design department the nerds of the company and the writers are the cool kids? Have you met a writer? Writers like wear cardigans and they debate about the Oxford comma. It just feels weird that Danny has the aspiration to be a writer, but we have no idea why. On top of that, what was her motivation to lie and get so deep into the lie and want clout. Like, we see she has no friends and no followers. Is she crazy, or is she just having an identity crisis? In interviews, they try to talk about how Dani is having an identity crisis. She doesn't know who she is because she basically hasn't been through anything substantial in her life. However, that's too broad of a motivation for her. Everyone goes through an identity crisis, but that doesn't mean they lie about being in a terrorist attack. Why does she even want clout or fame? We never see her like idolizing an influencer. She doesn't even want to be an influencer. She wants to be a writer. Why does she want to go to Paris? Why does she think that's so exciting? We could have seen her maybe watching Emily in Paris and being like, that's where I got the idea. I don't know. The why was never answered for this character, and it wasn't a well-written enough character for the why to not matter. They're probably thinking like, oh, the why doesn't matter. She's just like an evil white lady. But it's like, is she? I don't know. There's two extremes. It's either she's extreme and crazy, and I'll get into some examples, or she's like a flawed woman that has relatable characteristics, but does some bad things and has flaws. Dani sits kind of in the middle. Her actions indicate that she is kind of insane for going this far on this lie, but she doesn't have any other signs of being crazy. For example, in Ingrid Goes West, Aubrey Plaza plays Ingrid, who is a very unhinged character. In the trailer, we see her key someone's car, pepper spray a bride, she stalks people, she steals someone's dog. This whole movie is just a better execution, I think, of the themes that Not Okay was trying to cover. Ingrid wants to become popular on social media, and she starts trying to manipulate her photos to look like she's living a glamorous life, and also she tries to befriend this Instagram influencer that she is obsessed with, and actually she stalks her and kind of tries to take her place in her life. Like, she gets closer and closer and closer. And it's a super suspenseful movie. It is comedic, but it's a dark comedy where the dark and the light work together perfectly. Aubrey Plaza is just so good at playing an unhinged character. Aubrey Plaza carries this movie despite it already being a good movie. Elizabeth Olsen is also in it and plays the influencer, and she plays that role so well. Ingrid Goes West came out in 2017 and is kind of the millennial version of Not Okay. And Ingrid Goes West is also good because it is based on a 1999 movie called The Talented Mr. Ripley that stars a bunch of A-list people. It has Matt Damon, Gwyneth Paltrow, Jude Law. It's similar to Ingrid Goes West, but it's about like socialites, and it's like a boy version. Ingrid Goes West kind of adapted that idea for women and for social media. I do have to acknowledge that I hate comparing Ingrid Goes West here because it is written by male writers, and I question myself, like, dang, if Ingrid Goes West was written by guys, like, why is it so good? And I looked into it pretty deeply and found an interview where they said that their wife and girlfriend of the two male writers were steeped in the Instagram culture and were very involved in the process of writing Ingrid Goes West. While the credits are male writers, and I really hope these women behind them got credits too, it seemed more right that women were behind helping make this movie accurate. Another example, I've already talked about an unhinged and extreme villain, are Rosamund Pike's big roles, which Gone Girl is one, and then I Care a Lot, which is the movie I mentioned. Rosamund Pike plays this crazy lady so well. It's terrifying. And the reason these unhinged, like, insane characters like Ingrid or Rosamund Pike's characters are successful is because we have no idea what they're going to do next, and it becomes really suspenseful to figure out what they're going to do to people. And that's what's fascinating about these types of characters. In Not Okay, Dani is not quite all the way there where it's like she's fully unhinged, but she is kind of crazy for the way she manipulated and lied and having no motivation. She just doesn't feel like unhinged and calculated the way Ingrid and the Gone Girl and I Care a Lot characters are. And then on the other hand, which I think is more maybe what they were trying to go for, is like the flawed protagonist. And I think Mindy Kaling is really good at writing these. I know I reference this show to death, but Never Have I Ever, the main character named Debbie, she is so flawed. If you watch that show, you know Debbie stresses you out because she is just making the worst decisions ever. She's hurting people she cares about. But she has so many relatable qualities that make her charming, and she tries to make it right after she does it wrong. Like, it's a completely complex and flawed character, and all of her issues and conduct issues come from the grief of losing her father. So there's like also like a motivation and a reason behind her actions. So that's the other side of the spectrum, and Dani doesn't fit there either. She doesn't have relatable qualities, redeeming qualities. She doesn't have anything in her life that's like spurring this poor decision making. It just feels like she floats in this middle ground that just doesn't feel human to me. It isn't personified, because I think a character like her would either be more relatable or she's completely unhinged and we're just like, she's crazy, what is she gonna do next? I actually watched a show recently called I Love That For You, and the protagonist in that is kind of close to Dani, but it's a little bit better executed. It's still not my favorite execution. Vanessa Bayer is the main character of that show, and she actually lies about having cancer to secure her job, kind of. She's pretty unlikable because of that lie, and it's a pretty intense lie, and I felt kind of weird about it, but that character still had those relatable qualities where she fit into that Devi or flawed protagonist category, because there are moments that she's relatable and just kind of like clumsy or awkward in ways that are like normal and human. Unfortunately, I Love That For You is on Showtime, so it's kind of hard to access. And finally, the last issue I have with this movie, sorry this is a long video, but it made me think, and that's what the filmmakers intended. And I want to address how this movie covered the internet and social media. It's really, really hard to make a good social media movie. Some of the best I've seen is Ingrid Goes West. That's a great one. Also, 8th Grade by Bo Burnham, and that makes a lot of sense why it's one of the most like realistic depictions of social media I've ever seen, because Bo Burnham constantly explores the internet and the dark sides of it in his work, like constantly. He is chronically online himself, and that translates to his work. Similarly, Francesca Ramsey is also a creator that is chronically online, and it shows through in her work. She was the lead writer on the iCarly reboot, and despite iCarly's format being a cheesy sitcom, Francesca and the writer's experience with the internet still showed through. I believe it's episode 3 of season 1, but that episode has so much critique of the internet. It really resonated with me, and I was not expecting the iCarly reboot to have that effect. Not Okay does an okay job at representing accurate parts of the internet. I think the character of Colin is one of the best depictions of internet culture that is saying something, because there's one part where Harper calls him out for the way he's speaking, which is in a manner that appropriates Black culture. She's like, "You're from Maine," and he drops the accent to like do a comeback at her. The character of Colin was a good representation of like an e-boy culture vulture, so it's kind of like commenting on how that type of person is putting on this persona that they're appropriating from others and isn't true to their own background. I also thought the influencer party was good representation of internet culture, the way the sponsors were pushing the product so much, showing some of that capitalism and consumerism that is behind influencer culture. I think the depiction of cancel culture is also pretty accurate, having the commentary videos made, getting doxxed, which is one of the scariest things I can imagine, getting kind of assaulted on the streets if you're recognized. Despite all of this though, the internet commentary still felt pretty minimal and surface level. In general, aside from the Colin character, I feel like Not Okay doesn't critique the internet that much. Like, there could have been a lot of ways to put more nuance into the internet. Maybe they could have shown how Rowan has like stans defending her, and they show Rowan love on her page, and the same account will spew hate and death threats at Dani. They just could have shown more to critique kind of like the fickleness of the internet. I think this example is too recent, but the way Amber Heard was demonized, but the social media component of that phenomenon was so huge and interesting in like a scary way, but I just feel like Not Okay barely scratched the surface of the internet, and it's a hard thing to do. But I did read an interview with Quinn Shephard where she said she is not chronically online herself.
Time. Like, I was never like someone who's like chronically online.
I just feel like if you're not a chronically online person, you are not going to capture the nuances of the internet. It just is what it is. Write what you know. I'm not saying you shouldn't research and write about other things. I just mean like that's the risk, that it might just end up being a little surface level. She did a good job accurately representing some things, but it just wasn't a deep critique of the internet or social media when there could have been a lot there. When I was first watching the movie, I kind of sensed that a lot of research went into this movie because Danny looked like the Wikipedia page for Gen Z fashion. It was too much. Danny looked like a millennial that was going as a Gen Z for Halloween. I tried to take notes of every Gen Z thing I could see at once that Danny did. Here we go. The middle part, we have the 2 bleached hair strands, the long acrylic nails, the chunky plastic jewelry, the tiny tops with the baggy pants, cow print, the phone case with the little beads and the hearts. Her makeup being more minimal aside from maybe a graphic liner. She had the gelled brows, the lip gloss, the butterfly clips, the chunky sneakers, and then in her house she had the fairy lights and fake plants everywhere on the walls. Also, these hand motions. I think this was meant to show how Danny is like a trend chaser, but it's hard to infer that when we don't have any other clues. Like, we don't see her emulating TikTokers she sees or reading even a fashion magazine or something. We don't see her motivation for looking like that, and therefore it feels a lot more like a caricature of Gen Z. She's wearing like every trend everywhere all at once. Those are my thoughts on this movie. It did make me think. Unfortunately, I just didn't love it in the end. But I think the filmmaker would argue that's the point. And it's crazy because I thought this movie was just going to be the most straightforward comedy movie, and it ended up being this whole thing. I was so confused how to cover at first. I can admire the risk of covering a taboo subject, like that is commendable, to take a bold risk with your screenplay and not just make a typical and safe comedy. Let me know what you thought of Not Okay. Did you think it was okay, it was better than okay, or not great? I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed. I put out new videos once or twice a week. And you can follow me at Miscellaneous on Instagram or Twitter to find out about new videos, or just turn on the bell notification here on YouTube. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.